let's say you have a habit of eating really healthy, which everyone has done for at least a certain amount of time, and then you eat unhealthy food.
Your body hates
notice?
It. Yeah.
You hate it initially, but that's what you desire next.
So when we talk about mental illness, are these often are these chemical imbalances? Is there? We're talking about ADHD.
I'm gonna stop you right there with chemical imbalance, actually, because this is something that it's incredibly pervasive throughout just any health field and in like the American culture, right? Like we see these memes on Twitter and stuff and about depression, like, oh, where's my serotonin? And the chemical imbalance theory, sorry, I just kind of went a little on a tangent, but I feel like this is very important to say because it's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about mental illnesses. And this misconception is that all of these disorders are caused simply by a low amount of chemical in the brain. But then if you think about that and you kind of deconstruct that and you learn a little more about the brain, it seems a little too good to be true, right? Like our brain is this incredibly complex organs. Yeah. Like that it could be that simple. And and it's very far-fetched, and actually how that theory was come upon is not based on scientifically sound evidence. Rather, it was the antipsychotic drug risperidone, I think. I might have pronounced that wrong. I think it was initially meant to treat high blood pressure, or hypertension, but when given to people, they noticed that it induced depression, and it acted on, I think, dopamine and serotonin. So from there, the whole conception was, okay, so if this drug can induce depression in people, right? So then, like what this drug does chemically in your brain must be the cause of depression. So...
Do you agree with that that drug was the cause of the depression?
Yeah, absolutely, because it was, they would give this drug to people in clinical trials, and they would report as a side effect this melancholy depression, right? And if you look up the drug, that is consistent with its chemical mechanism of action. But the mistake the researchers made in positing that kind of like the anti-drug of risperidone would then cure depression, right? By, you know what I mean? Because like they thought that since risperidone could induce depression by altering the levels of dopamine and therefore serotonin in your brain, that low dopamine and serotonin, that was why people were depressed. Does that make sense? Like,
so they said, okay, I found the cause, and they labeled it as the cause rather than digging deeper to try to figure out more about it.
Not necessarily. There's a lot more to it, and there's a lot of other stuff that went into building and kind of foundationalizing this misconception. There was a ton of influence from big pharma, because obviously that makes them money when people, and I'm not trying to denounce any sort of psychotropic medication. I am on Lexapro, an anti-anxiety med. I take meds for my ADHD. I'm not saying that these meds do not work, but I do not think that it is applicable in the context of the brain, with it being this incredibly, incredibly complex organ with these different neurotransmitter systems. And neurotransmitters don't even, you can't just point at serotonin and say, this is mood. Like, a neurotransmitter has effects based on what its receptors do and where it is in the brain. So it's not just like one neurotransmitter has these certain effects and the other one has this certain effects. It's like they all can do everything, So to say that a lack of one of them, just a simple lack of one of them, causes depression is kind of fundamentally incorrect. And it's kind of the same thing as saying, okay, so you have a headache and you take aspirin and your headache improves. And so this must mean that your headache is caused by a lack of aspirin. right?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so yeah, and that's kind of the logic they're using by saying that, oh, we have certain drugs that either induce depression or cure depression, and since these drugs do things, then depression must be caused by different levels of neurotransmitters. The media quite frequently will take scientific findings and completely distort them. You know,
it's not just scientific findings.
Not well,
every
everything.
Piece of information,
right?
Yeah.
Good point. But like, especially scientific findings.
Well, it makes you realize how harmful it can be, though.
Yeah,
when you broadcast something that's not based off of logic or reasoning or scientific data, but the perspective of someone that they want to emit over a large group of people. And like something that occurred to me when you were talking is I'm like, well, what are we eating? Like, what are we putting in our bodies to create the biome that we have?
The FDA actually doesn't regulate so many things. Like any health supplement you buy, like I
didn't even think of that.
You know, is not FDA regulated. They could be putting whatever they want in there. And I can talk more about health supplements and like especially like neurocognitive enhancers like 5-HT. 5-HT, which people buy and take because they think it helps. GABA, people often buy these GABA pills, which apparently work by raising the levels of GABA in your brain, which is true. That is a good anxiety cure, but do
we know the full implications of what that does to you?
Well, no, because GABA doesn't even cross the blood-brain barrier. Any neurotransmitter cannot pass through the blood-brain barrier because the blood-brain barrier only lets pass through small, lipid-soluble, uncharged molecules.
See, we don't know that.
Right, yeah, and so you take these pills and you buy them.
Like if we bought those pills, we'd have no idea.
Exactly, and I mean...
And we're probably more like most people in that regard, but that specific instance than you and not knowing. So why are there so many of them being sold at every place you go?
Because people want an easy fix, right? And I fell into this pitfall. Right, yeah, like I kind of fell into this pitfall before I was actually treating my anxiety in a way... And I don't want to say that holistic treatments are not the way. I absolutely think if they work for you and that is your chosen path, then by all means, go do that. Like, it is whatever is best for the individual. But in my case, that didn't work for me. And I, went to these health stores and bought these supplements. I did a little more research. I almost bought into it.
But like, outside of medication, what is like the neurological impact of the amount of like fat and sugar and salt?
Great one.
Because like I can't imagine that at least some of these psychological issues that we're running into with a lot of people are as a result
obesity
of
has a huge impact.
I'm sure, and I've always heard that obesity is the largest cause of death in America because of heart condition and all of the negative aspects of that. So do you think that what do you think would cause more good if humanity, or more specifically Americans, were to eat in a way that benefits them rather in a way that they enjoy, or all of these potential medications? Like, is it lifestyle changes, or is it medications, or is it like obviously there's a gray area that would be the ideal scenario, but like what do you think are the objective truths that no one is actually using right now? Like what are we not implementing?
Absolutely. You bring up a very good point with obesity and your diet, actually, because, so something a lot of people don't think about is the nutrients we obtain from food are drugs. They're drugs like any other drug, right? Food is just, at its core, made of all of these chemicals. And these chemicals affect our body and brains the same way any other endogenous drug would. So what you are eating has a direct effect on not only your body composition and overall physical health, but your mental health as well. And this is a relatively new frontier, but the gut microbiome is actually being really focused on now, and its implications for mental health, because the gut is... I think people are calling it like the new brain.
Well, like I think here's something that... So I was talking to one of my friends recently, and he's in med school, and I was like, what's something that you could tell me that you've learned that I have no idea being in business school? And he was like this. When you eat something, your stomach structures around that in a way that causes you to desire whatever it was that you have recently eaten in the future.